The stage lights burned bright as Keith Urban stepped forward, guitar in hand, facing a crowd that had no idea they were witnessing more than just another concert. This was his first public appearance since the news broke. Nicole Kidman had filed for divorce. For nearly 2 decades, theirs had been one of Hollywood's most admired love stories. They spoke of each other with warmth and reverence in interviews, appeared inseparable on red carpets, and seemed to embody the rare idea that fame and lasting love could coexist. But behind that carefully maintained image, a very different story had been unfolding. The revelation sent shockwaves through the entertainment world. For years, there had been whispers, subtle hints that all was not as perfect as it seemed, but nothing concrete had ever surfaced. Then came an unexpected voice, Russell Crowe, a longtime friend to Nicole and someone who had been close enough to witness moments hidden from public view. He broke his silence. What he suggested painted a far more complicated and painful picture of the marriage. Crowe's connection to Nicole stretched back decades, long before international fame reshaped their lives. They met in the Australian entertainment scene of the late 1980s, when both were young, ambitious, and still finding their footing. Their bond wasn't built on celebrity, but on shared roots, struggles, and an understanding of what it meant to chase something bigger than themselves. Over time, that bond became one of unwavering loyalty. Through Nicole's high-profile marriage to Tom Cruise, through its eventual breakdown, and through the many public and private challenges that followed, Crowe remained a constant presence. He wasn't just a friend on the sidelines. He was someone she trusted deeply, someone who saw beyond headlines and public personas. It was from this position that he witnessed the beginning of her relationship with Keith Urban. The two first crossed paths in 2005 at a gala in Los Angeles. From across the room, Crowe noticed a spark between them, yet it wasn't immediate or effortless. Nicole later admitted she wasn't even sure Keith had noticed her at first. For months, nothing happened. No calls, no follow-up, just silence. Then, suddenly, everything changed. When Keith finally reached out, their connection ignited quickly and intensely. One early memory stood out, a ride through Woodstock on his motorcycle, ending in a quiet picnic that Nicole would later describe as the moment she fell completely. From there, the relationship moved fast. By June 2006, just over a year after they met, they were married. To the outside world, it was a fairy tale. Two successful Australian stars finding love and building a life together. But almost immediately, that story was tested. Only 4 months into their marriage, Keith checked himself into rehab, confronting long-standing struggles with addiction. It was a moment that could have ended everything before it truly began. Instead, Nicole made a decision that would define the next phase of their relationship. She stayed. She put her career on hold, canceled commitments, and focused entirely on supporting him. But her support came with clarity. She understood that she couldn't fix him. He had to do that himself. Her role was to stand beside him, not carry him. It was a delicate balance of love, strength, and boundaries. Against the odds, they made it through. For years afterward, their relationship appeared stronger than ever. Keith often spoke about how Nicole had grounded him, how she had given him stability and purpose. They built a family, shared milestones, and continued to present a united front to the world. But beneath that surface, new challenges were quietly emerging. One of the most significant was distance. Keith's career required extensive touring, keeping him on the road for nearly 200 days a year. Over time, this created a physical and emotional divide. They lived in separate worlds for much of the year, relying on calls, messages, and brief reunions to maintain their connection. Distance alone doesn't destroy a relationship, but it can amplify existing cracks. According to accounts later shared, this separation began to take a toll. Communication changed. Where conversations had once been open and detailed, they became shorter, more guarded. Keith seemed increasingly distracted, even when he was home. Then came the subtle warning signs. He became unusually protective of his phone, keeping it close, turning it face down, reacting defensively to simple questions. For a couple with nearly 2 decades of shared life, this shift was difficult to ignore. At the same time, his public displays of affection grew more intense. Speeches, tributes, emotional declarations. On the surface, they reinforced the image of a devoted husband, but privately they raised questions. To an outside audience, those moments felt heartfelt. To someone watching more closely, they could appear like overcompensation, a way of reinforcing a narrative that didn't fully align with reality. Nicole, known for her intelligence and intuition, began to sense something was wrong. She didn't react impulsively. Instead, she observed. She paid attention to inconsistencies, to small details that didn't quite add up. She began making unannounced visits to his shows, gestures that seemed supportive, but also allowed her to see things firsthand. The emotional strain began to show. On film sets, there were moments where her vulnerability felt unusually raw, particularly in scenes involving betrayal or heartbreak. Those close to her noticed the shift. Eventually, suspicion gave way to discovery. One night, alone with his phone, she found messages, clear, undeniable, and deeply painful. They suggested a relationship with someone from his touring circle, including private meetings that contradicted what he had told her. It wasn't just the content of the messages. It was a pattern, the realization that this hadn't been a single mistake, but something more sustained. Soon after, the confrontation came. It wasn't explosive or chaotic. Instead, it was long, controlled, and devastating. Over several hours, Nicole laid out everything she had found. The messages, the inconsistencies, the evidence that formed a clear picture of betrayal. By the end of that conversation, she gave him one final chance. Her terms were direct. Complete honesty, meaningful changes to his lifestyle, and a commitment to repairing the relationship through counseling. It was not an emotional plea. It was a boundary. For a time, it seemed like things might improve. There were signs of effort, even gestures that suggested a renewed commitment. But those changes didn't last. When the same patterns returned, something shifted permanently. The issue was no longer just betrayal. It was a broken promise after being given a chance to make things right. At that point, the decision became clear. Nicole moved forward with quiet determination. There was no public drama, no drawn-out spectacle. The legal process was handled efficiently and privately. The settlement reflected that same approach, structured, decisive, and final. To outsiders, the speed and silence were surprising. But in reality, the emotional decision had already been made long before the paperwork. As news of the divorce spread, public perception began to take shape. Some narratives painted Keith as a man whose career had simply created distance, while Nicole was framed as distant or withdrawn. That was part of what prompted Russell Crowe to speak. For him, it wasn't about exposing private details. It was about correcting what he saw as a misleading narrative. From his perspective, Nicole hadn't walked away lightly. She had invested years of loyalty, support, and forgiveness into the relationship. The decision to leave came only after those efforts had been exhausted. In the aftermath, the contrast between them became noticeable. Keith largely stepped back from public view, canceling appearances and avoiding media attention. Reports suggested he was struggling with both the situation and how it was being perceived. Nicole, on the other hand, remained composed. She continued working, fulfilling commitments, and maintaining her focus on her children and career. There were no public statements attacking him, no attempts to control the narrative through drama. Her response was consistent with how she had handled challenges throughout her life, with restraint, dignity, and resilience. In the end, what emerged wasn't just a story of a marriage ending, but the story of how it ended. It was not a sudden collapse, but a gradual unraveling, not a single moment of failure, but a series of choices and consequences. And ultimately, it became a story about boundaries, about recognizing when something can no longer be repaired. Nicole's legacy in this context isn't defined by the breakup itself. It's defined by how she navigated it, with clarity, strength, and a refusal to compromise her sense of self. The fairy tale may have ended, but what remains is something far more real, a portrait of someone who faced betrayal, made difficult decisions, and moved forward without losing her dignity.